forging relationships with people, if they're a good storyteller, then I'm like, okay, I'm in.
It's kind of funny that the people that you most enjoy hanging out with are storytellers. It's almost like you surround yourself with the human equivalent of books.
My library of friends.
It is fascinating to me to see how the internet connects people of different interests. There seems to be a niche for just about everything. And I'm fascinated also by the mechanics of this, how these communities come to be. My guest today is the king of BookTube and BookTok, the one and only Jack Edwards. BookTube and BookTok are the nicknames for the community that exists on social media around books and book reviews and the culture that connects with these books. So having said that, without any further ado, I hope you enjoy. There we go.
Okay, I want you to feel like you're at a meditation retreat when you talk to me.
It's amazing for setting a vibe.
It's quite romantic.
Now let me ask you this: why exactly are you carrying around a lighter?
It says "Merci."
So it's like a French.
It was my French souvenir. Well, from when I lived here, and
okay,
I'm
and
still
you carry it around
it
with you? I mean, do
yeah.
you smoke? Or
no?
Okay.
But if I remember, then I'll put it in my pocket. Sometimes I feel like you end up like meeting people, you know, if you're just in the smoking area and someone's like, oh, do you have a lighter? And you give them one.
Yeah.
That like, I don't know, that moment of giving someone something is kind of sometimes reciprocated with a great conversation. So.
Yeah, no, totally. It's a great social tool.
Exactly.
Yeah, this does honestly create but I kind of like it. I mean, it's there's hardly anything more intimate than like a one-on-one conversation where you deep dive into something, I feel like, right? So, okay, I have a lot of questions that I'm excited to ask you.
Should I be nervous?
No, not at all. I feel like we should start from the beginning though.
Okay.
Can you give a quick overview on how you became the king of YouTube, right? I mean, or BookTube, right? The king of what's the term?
I'll take that. I'll take it. As long as you say it and not me. Those words would never come out of my mouth. But yeah, I initially I had a blog that was kind of for like travel stuff.
Yeah.
It actually started because when I was 14, I wrote to my local newspaper and I was like, hey, I've just written this review of the new Hunger Games movie.
Okay.
And the world needs to hear it. And they replied going, no, they don't. It's not good. But the guy basically said, I would, if you're interested in this kind of thing, maybe you could make a blog.
This is at what age?
At 14.
So this is way before. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So this is 10 years ago. So then I made the blog and then started putting my little reviews and just literally documenting travel stuff, which then evolved into my YouTube channel, which turned into a kind of guide to university, I guess. I sort of took my viewers along with me to university, which I feel hadn't really been done before in such a candid way where I was really nervous. I really didn't know what to expect. And so I just wanted to be as transparent and like demystify the process as much as I possibly could.
Yeah.
And then
you basically at that time you stumbled into your first like trending niche, right?
Yeah.
Studying.
And then StudyTube became like a thing.
Right.
Of young people all at some point in their education just sharing genuine tips, because mostly stuff that you like revision tips, study guides all come from teachers and people so much older than you, but not people doing it right now along with you. And so I think that that's why StudyTube became so relatable, because it was just like students sharing the things that are getting them through their studies, which work for other people too. So it was a really nice community. It was really fun. And weirdly, even though I was doing an English literature degree, the one thing that I never included in the videos was the books that I was reading, because I thought, who cares? Like, why would anyone care about what I'm reading?
Interesting.
And it took until the pandemic when I'd graduated from my degree, and I feel like we all kind of went back to our roots of like what makes us us, and going back to our hobbies and our passions. And for me it was reading, and I spent a month alone in my apartment and I read 30 books in 30 days.
Wow.
And I was really having this crisis of like, where do I go with this StudyTube stuff now that I finished my degree? And I just decided to give book content a little go.
Okay, let me jump in there for a
Yeah.
second. So why were you in a crisis with StudyTube? It wasn't working well?
Well, I just think that it stopped reflecting who I really was.
So you lost the passion for it?
Yeah, for sure. Because I was no longer a student. So then I was sharing study tips, but I wasn't studying anything. And I was looking for jobs, and I was sharing the real process of coming out of university into a pandemic, which, you know, everyone's favorite word is like unprecedented, but it was. And it was really confusing and strange to graduate into that environment, an atmosphere, and it wasn't going well. No one wanted to hire me. I was applying for like security jobs at hotels, and like, look at me, I'm not going to protect anyone. Do you know what I mean? You'd get to the hotel and be like, this isn't safe if he's in charge.
Right.
So I was applying for like
Everyone loves a little bit of self-deprecating humor.
I was applying for jobs that I was not qualified for at all.
Yeah.
Just because the job market was so, you know, sparse. There was nothing to apply for. I would have loved to have worked in publishing, but it wasn't going well in terms of applying for things. So I ended up applying for anything and everything.
Gotcha.
And yeah, then I think I was sharing that and trying to be really, really candid by showing the rejection, showing the failures, showing all the, unfortunately, your application has been unsuccessful, which I got a lot of. I wanted to share all of that. But actually, it made me feel very vulnerable because I was oversharing. I was sharing way too much, and in an unhealthy way. It was almost like toxic honesty, if that's the thing. You can put toxic in front of anything and make it a thing, I think. But yeah, like it was oversharing, and it wasn't good for me to be that open with an internet that was like, you didn't get the job because you're this kind of person, and you didn't get that job because you're lazy and whatever. And I was like, you don't actually know me. So that was a weird time, and I was just ready to move on, I think.
Yeah.
And the second you start like losing the passion for something, I think that's when you know your body starts like having warning signals.
Definitely.
Time to change this up.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was the best thing I ever did.
Isn't it crazy how your motivation will just completely disappear?
Yeah.
So the timeline of this was what was the year you began with StudyTube?
StudyTube, I started making StudyTube videos in 2017.
Okay. So a 3-year life cycle.
Yeah. And then I started making the BookTube stuff late 2021.
Gotcha. And that has
early
completely
2022.
blown up. Like it took off so quickly.
It's been crazy.
I feel like you've been around for longer than that with with the BookTube stuff. So I'm shocked at how quickly.
Yeah.
So, and I realized that at the beginning of this, I said king of YouTube, not even just king of BookTube.
That's why I was like, let's calm down. Let's just take that back a notch.
So how do you think, like, how would you explain to people? I mean, do you accept that title as king of BookTube?
I don't know. I think that BookTube as a space is just a really exciting place to be. And I'm just lucky that I get to be a part of it, and contribute in any way. But like,
okay,
really,
that's the nice answer.
True, but often like the most innovative ideas are coming from the smallest creators. And obviously credit is so important, and when you jump on a trend, like crediting the person who started it. But BookTube is and Book Talk, the book space online is like such a symbiotic thing where viewers and creators, bigger, smaller creators are all kind of bouncing off each other. So I don't really think that there's anyone who's like king, queen, monarch. That's a gender neutral term, but like
yes,
anything like that. I don't think it's fair to suggest that anyone is like dominating it, because it's such a community, more so than any other space on the internet, I think.
So how would you explain this ecosystem, if you will, to somebody who's not a part of it? You know, in all honesty, being fully transparent here, like I'm not a huge reader of fiction. I read a lot of fiction as a kid. I'd like to read more. Yeah. But the truth is, like, I'm not going through a book a week. You know? And so from an external perspective, I'm like, damn, how do people need this many book suggestions? You know what I mean? You're showing up every week with like 14 book ideas for 2023, right? That was a recent video. Explain that to me. Explain what you think is going on. Is it people just want to hear a friend talk about some of their favorite books and maybe they'll pick one of them? Or what do you think it is?
I think it's cozy. It's like comforting. It's nice to be able to create a community out of an activity that is done in isolation,
Yeah.
right? Like reading is a solo venture. And so I think that it's very nice to be able to find a safe space to just enjoy that with other people. In terms of the number of recommendations, I think that it's a case of the publishing industry is so exciting because it's developing every week. New books come out and old gems are rediscovered. So I feel like I'm kind of on a personal journey of discovering lots of new stuff. And I basically just get to share that with other people and do a lot of the dirty work for them. Like I read really widely, and then I can kind of come forward and say, out of the 182 books that I read last year, like these were my favorite 14.
Yeah.
And I think that, books are expensive. It's an investment in something you're probably only going to read once. I feel like people want to know when they go to the bookstore that they're getting something that they're going to enjoy. Yeah. It's also a time commitment.
Huge time investment.
It's not like a YouTube video. The time investment for a YouTube video is short. It's also free, so you can click off it at any point. Nothing lost, nothing gained, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I feel like if you buy a book that you end up not liking, it feels annoying. You invested in something both in terms of financially and your time. So being able to sort of filter some things, and if people, I guess over time people realize like, if they have similar traits to me or interests, then they will enjoy the books that I recommend.
Right.
So
it's so interesting actually that you started this by explaining in your journey that you lost the motivation to do something, a previous phase in your career.
Yeah.
And you sort of went from one niche to the next it wasn't intentional. It seemed like it happened accidentally.
Yeah.
But has the thought crossed your mind, damn, I might get bored of doing this at some point, or I might maybe not get sick of reading, but I might get sick of reading and then having to like make videos about it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, it's important to point out, you made a job, you created a career out of something that most people just do to unwind, right?
Yeah. Honestly, reading and writing have been like the great loves of my life, I think. And when I think back, it's been the most constant thing for me in terms of it's been my most constant interest and hobby. And now I'm more interested in it than ever. And it keeps evolving for me. And I think maybe the next stage for me will be sharing more of a writing journey alongside being a reader, because that's the one thing I've never shared really is the writing. So I don't know. I feel like as long as I'm buzzing to make the content, then I'll keep making it, and when that stops, then naturally things will evolve. And I'm having done it before. Now I'm so much more open-minded to being like, whatever you want to create, you should just create it.
Right. Yeah. So you've never felt like the fact that there's increased pressure now, like you make money by doing this, that it's ever endangered the underlying joy of just reading?
Honestly, no, because I spend all my time being excited to make the next video and coming up with new concepts. And I think maybe what I did that hadn't been done in the book space before was to make book videos in a very conceptual way. So like the standard BookTube that I had always watched was like a video at the start of the month saying what I'm going to read this month, or the books that I'd like to read this month, and then a video at the end, what I read this month and how I reviewed them. And then maybe throughout the month you might have some reading vlogs of like just people going about their life and reading. And I love those videos, but I felt like there was nothing I could contribute to that hadn't already been being done. So I just started making videos that were about like books in pop culture. So books that are featured in The White Lotus, or books that Harry Styles has recommended, that kind of thing. I got an AI to recommend me books and I read them like last week. And what's cool is that new shows are always coming out, new art forms that feature books are always being developed. And so, yeah, it's become this evergreen thing where I just sort of vibe with, I've always been interested in pop culture too. So in the like Venn diagram of my interests, I guess that's where my YouTube channel sits. Yeah. Right in the middle. So that probably is why I've kind of found a niche within a niche, which is like books in pop culture, which is maybe why it can reach an audience outside of people who are traditional readers, because I can kind of meet people halfway. So you maybe aren't a reader, but you are a Harry Styles fan, so then you might watch a video on books Harry Styles has recommended, And then you might find your new favorite book and you might go out to the bookstore and buy a book that maybe you wouldn't normally have considered. And that can make you a reader for life. That is so powerful. I think that a lot of people grow up loving reading. When you're a kid, you love like Harry Potter and the Hunger Games and Divergent and Twilight. And then you get older and you go to school and reading is introduced to you in an academic way.
Yeah.
And that is your first introduction probably to adult literature and adult reading. And I think people fall out of love with it. People start seeing it as something that you have to do rather than something that you want to do, in a way that never really happens with films or music, because you continue doing that in your leisure time regardless. Reading, I think, is one of the things that gets lost at that point. And so for me, as someone in my 20s, I want to be like, maybe I can introduce you to a book that could reignite a lifelong love for reading. Because it might be in there. It might be innate. It might be something that you have naturally a preference for, but you've kind of had it stifled by the education system, you know, and having to read like Shakespeare and Of Mice and Men and things like that.
Hey,
like,
what do you have against Shakespeare, man?
I have nothing against Shakespeare. I think he's a great guy.
No, but I totally, what's interesting about this is that I think what you're pinpointing, which I've also struggled with the education system, is that you'll take something that is so freaking awesome and then turn it into an assignment. And then it doesn't matter how awesome that thing is. You just suck the joy out of it. And it's for this reason that I'm glad I didn't take French classes in high school, because I am so glad that I got to experience that in a place where I could really just interact with people and be like, oh my God, adieu, just like goodbye, right, is to God. And like to like make these little discoveries on this journey as I'm learning this new language. Totally different experience. So,
but it's not, you don't get that curiosity so much in a classroom, because you're studying for an exam, so you're studying to pass something. I think that if you go from being introduced to literature as a child, where it's this amazing world that you can escape, you create a movie in your head just from black and white words on a page. You go from that to then studying at school, and it's like, why is this thing this color, and what does that symbolize? And that's great, but it doesn't make people excited a lot of the time.
Right.
And studying books for an exam means people fall out of love with it. So I'm kind of just trying to bridge that gap and meet people halfway and say like, hey, maybe you might want to pick that back up again, friend.
Totally. No, and I think that's great. And I want to come back to that in a second, but I'm noticing something kind of curious here, because your first wave or phase of being on YouTube was StudyTube, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of funny that you have these gripes with the education system. Do you think that contributed to you falling out of love with that, or?
I love education. I love learning. And like even since graduating, I came to Paris to learn French, and I then went to New York and took a screenwriting course. And I feel like I have that natural curiosity that I'm trying to keep alive.
But you did kind of DIY it, like you sign yourself up for workshops and whatnot. And then you're going to a foreign country to do it.
Yeah, because it's a little adventure.
But so did you feel conflicted with, your time in university, or?
Not really. I think that more for me, it's about the people who do fall out of love with those things. I mean, I have no interest in like maths, but then I read a book called The Housekeeper and the Professor, which is all about like the beauty of numbers. And it really gave me a different perspective on maths, because when I studied it at school, I was always just like, oh, it's that class I don't want to go to.
Yeah.
I just was like, I'm always going to have a calculator. Why am I studying for an exam without one? And then reading this book about like a professor who was just absolutely infatuated with numbers and the precision of maths, I was like, actually, I never thought of it like that. So sometimes I think it's about approach and mentality and perspective, and so I just try and hopefully shed light on the perspective of like, hey, reading could actually be really fun.
Wow, that's such a powerful point. I feel like I feel that that's so necessary. Whenever you dive into something new, you have to figure out the particular angle that works for you. And I think I agree with you. I mean, one of the most beautiful things in life is to learn something new, right? But to create a system that's pretty one size fits all, obviously it creates challenges.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of interesting that you use books to figure out how to have a greater appreciation for math. But I love that.
I'm a parody of myself. Like, literally.
I mean, hey, do you have anything to prove to anybody? Like,
I don't think so.
yeah, I don't. I feel like did you feel like at any point you had something to prove to the world?
Maybe at the point when I graduated, and then people were expecting, like, what job are you going to go into? And
right. And you got a degree in what again?
Literature.
Okay,
yeah.
So what were you heading towards before?
Well, so I was looking into, at one point, journalism, and then I kind of fell out of love with journalism because I realized how kind of like cutthroat it could be, and I didn't really love that. And then it was publishing, and I ended up working in publishing for a year and a half after graduating, which I loved, and I loved getting to spend time with books in that capacity too, and learning more about the industry. So I think I'm obsessed. But that point when I was like applying for jobs and not getting them was when I really was like feeling that I had something to prove of, because everyone was asking me like, what is your next step? And I was like, I don't know. I'm working it out. And doing that on a public platform was just a pressure I wouldn't wish on anyone, because it was, it's horrible when you go home or like you're at Christmas dinner and one of your relatives is like, so what are you doing with your life? It was like that, but every 2 minutes there was a comment. Now, what are you doing?
What do you think happened there? You just got into this mode of like, I like sharing my life, and then only later on you realized, okay, I'm probably oversharing and I don't want people's opinions. And
I went completely the other way, and now I really feel like I don't share that much personal stuff.
And that's an intentional decision.
100%. That's self-preservation. Because I feel like I would prefer for the value of my content to be like the stuff I'm talking about, so the books and the that approach to life, rather than who I am as a person. I feel like that kind of should be irrelevant. It's cool that other people do want to share that, and some YouTubers position themselves almost like reality stars, where we're like watching their lives unfold. And I just realized that I didn't want to do that as much. So there's an element of sharing what I'm up to. And
I mean, you do a fair amount like on Instagram and whatnot, right? Like,
but
people
I like to
follow
keep
along your life.
Yeah. I like to keep a lot of things to myself though, and it's nice to have those things that are like just for you. My family have never been on my channel.
Okay.
All my friends who aren't like content creators
are
not on my channel. And we were saying this before, but I usually back in the day, I feel like I would meet people and like we'd collaborate and we make a video together. Yeah. Whereas now I meet other creators and I just want to hang out and talk about creating. And, we met over a year ago. Yeah. And now we're sitting down to make something because it just is fun. It's our hobby, right? So I kind of love that side of it. Being around creative people is the best thing ever, right?
So that's really interesting though, because like, I agree to a great extent that it's important to consider self-preservation on the internet. And I would be lying if I didn't say I take a lot of things into consideration before I publish them, right? Yeah. But I have shared my family,
Yeah.
Like, and now my dad is a YouTuber,
which is so cool. Yeah.
And sometimes, I mean, I've opened up also even on things like finances and whatnot. Yeah. And then I wonder sometimes, like, was this too far? I don't know. I can't undo this, but I haven't ever regretted it necessarily. It's just really tricky because I try to use it as an exercise to be as open and vulnerable as possible. Mm-hmm. But there are certain things I don't want to share with people because I've come to the conclusion people might have the impression that they know who you are, but just from watching your videos, they don't really.
It's a snapshot. Yeah.
I mean, that's how I feel. Do you feel like people know who you are?
I think like the bones are there. Like it's still me. It's my personality. Like that can't go away. And I love getting to know people in that capacity. Yeah. That's really fun. Where do you draw the line? Because if you're happy to talk about like finances and family, like what's the...
That line keeps changing, to be honest with you. I keep trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
because, you know, I thought I'd never talk about my like romantic life.
Yeah.
And then I did a whole video on it last year, and I
Yeah.
was really proud of how that came out. And a lot of people connected with what I did.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a feeling of pride because I felt like I did something original,
Mm-hmm.
and I was able to contribute something meaningful. But that being said, I did it in a way where I didn't go into any specific details. You know, that's kind of the line I draw. I don't want to get into specific drama or whatever.
Well, I feel like there was a time in my like online career where I was so interested in like airing dirty laundry and just being like, I'm annoyed today and I'm annoyed about this. Whereas now I feel like I'm a lot more, maybe it's just getting older and maturing, but now I'm a lot more considered with what I want to share and talk about. And sometimes it's not worth your energy.
Yeah.
So, but equally, you know, I know people who have been on first dates with someone and vlogged it.
That's insane.
And they've showed the person they went on the first date with. Do you know what I mean? And if that works for you, then great. But that's just not, you know, that's not the kind of content that I am good at, you know, that I don't have anything valuable to share in that capacity. I just, what I am good at or what I think I offer is something a bit different.
Totally.
And that's not to assign value to either thing. It's just that different people are better at doing different things.
Yeah. It's also incredibly easy to just get into performance mode. You know, like, are you having the same kind of first date?
Yeah.
If you're showing up with a camera?
Yeah. For me, it's just been a process of making sure that I'm living and then filming it rather than living to film it.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Have you ever felt it like that got out of hand? Like you lost control of that balance? Or maybe that's what happened when you were applying to jobs?
Yeah, that's when it happened for sure. And I was like showing myself like, oh, I'm getting ready for this job interview. And then later in the video, I'm like, well, I didn't get that one. And maybe that's what people needed at the time. And maybe that's what I needed. Like maybe I did need a creative outlet to laugh about it. That's always been my philosophy with anything is like, it's for the plot, you know.
But I got to say, you know, yes, sometimes it's like you just don't need thousands and thousands of people that you don't know opinionating on what you're doing.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, I said this in a recent episode too. It's just like I try to invite the comments, the haters, if you will, in as an opportunity to work on my ability to accept criticism and not let that necessarily change my view of myself. You know, like people can have different perspectives on things, and that's okay. That doesn't change my personal reality. But I feel sometimes I can be kind of flimsy, like that can affect me emotionally. And so I still try to, it's almost like a stoic thing, if you will. I still try to let it in to try to become more solid in my values, if that makes sense. But then again, I don't know. I don't know if that makes any sense whatsoever, because the internet is this bizarre new thing.
The most humbling thing you can ever do is upload a TikTok, because the comment section on TikTok does not hold back.
Do you read them?
Yeah, for sure. But like, you know, I think that I can now think of it as a consumer of TikTok too. Like when you are scrolling through hundreds of pieces of content, hundreds of people so rapidly, they do stop feeling real. And, you know, you can
Doesn't
just
that
tap
freak
on
you out?
Yeah, you can tap on a comment section and be like, oh my God, all these people thinking exactly what I was thinking, you know? And a lot of things go viral on TikTok, not because of the content, but because everyone in the comments is saying the same thing about that piece of content, you know?
It's
so
insane.
Yeah.
But do you feel that disincentivizes being like vulnerable and intimate in the material that you share, because people can just rip you to shreds?
Yeah, maybe. I definitely think that I consciously took a step back from sharing certain parts of my life, but for me it was better this way. You know.
Okay. You're solid in your decision.
I feel pretty content, and I like feeling like I took control of it again. Like if I want to share things, I absolutely will, and I'm by no means a private person. Do you know what I mean? I have an account on every social media. But for me, there was definitely like a conscious step back of being like, I don't need to share every single day of my life.
That's good. It's so hard to keep the balance though, I find.
But I feel like for me, it was a process of finding something. And for me, it's been books and reading to refract everything else through. So like you can come into one of my videos and you will get a week in my life, but it's from the lens of like what I'm reading, and it gives me something to focus on, which makes everything cohesive, but also without having to just sit there and be like, these are my deep thoughts today.
Totally. Instead of your personality being the through line necessarily.
Yeah.
I mean, you're always there.
Yeah, you get a little bit of both.
But you can place the emphasis on the books. I think that's a really, really powerful insight that I've come to a similar conclusion that you need to have other things in your life that anchor you so that you're not just relying on having to be interesting all the time, because nobody is interesting all the time,
Yeah.
you know?
Definitely.
So, okay, since we landed on TikTok here,
Yeah.
you've had quite a bit of success with short form content. I was looking at a few earlier actually.
Okay.
And I thought the one that you did where it's like a spoiler of a book where the main character dies.
It's like a book where the main character dies and then it like turns over and it's the Bible.
Really hilarious.
But I sent it to my friends being like, is this too much? Have I gone too far with this? And they were like, no, I think it's okay. And it's so funny. You come up with this idea, create it, and then the power of short form content. Like that video has maybe 8 million views on TikTok, Instagram, and Shorts, which is crazy.
I mean, just on YouTube, I think it had like more than 5 million.
Yeah,
so,
which is mad. And it's still growing every day.
Mind blowing.
Ridiculous.
So, as somebody who has a fair amount of resistance
to short form content.
To short form content. I mean, I'm making shorts out of this podcast, so it's better than nothing. But walk me through what makes a good short. Like, what is your thought process on this?
Okay, so you got to have like the hook right at the start, because people can just flick away so quickly.
So it's a good caption.
You got to have the caption or something interesting right at the beginning. But also for me, it's about being a genuine consumer of short form content, and it's a different art form. I feel like if you try to go from long form to short form and do the same thing, it's just not going to work. There's a completely different way of presenting information in each format, and being a consumer of that content is the easiest way of just like understanding innately what the difference is.
So do you agree with a lot of the criticisms that certain people, myself may or may not be included, have about short form?
What is the criticism?
I think it's the idea that I certainly feel that short form can it can suck you into this like black hole. First of all, it's like a little too addictive. It's a little too jumpy in your face.
Yeah.
But also, I think what I struggle with sometimes is, and I'm not saying this is everybody's experience, but I'll see some reels or I'll see some TikToks, and almost never will I walk away from that experience and be like, I learned something really valuable. It's more like entertainment, I might laugh out loud watching a few, and I there's value in that. But I just feel like 15 seconds isn't enough to get deep into an idea. And maybe it's not necessarily that. Maybe it's just the way that they're consumed, right? Like I'm not taking the time to like let that sit in because you're on to the next one. Do you agree with these criticisms?
So would you say your criticism is like the information diet is so overwhelming that you're not really consuming anything?
That's part of it.
Yeah.
It's also like the culture that's been created around how this is consumed. And also in some ways, the limitations of the format, right? Like how much depth can you pack into 15 seconds, right? You basically have time for like one.
True, but I would say
idea.
most pieces of at least informative content will probably be closer to a minute, know? And I think actually you can get a surprising amount in. What I think is really cool about short form content is that it's making more creators. Like I'm seeing more and more people being willing to put themselves out there and make a little TikTok and share something, whether that's a hack in the kitchen of an easier way to chop something, or, some insight into the music industry. People who would not sit down and record a YouTube video with a camera and everything like that and a tripod and a microphone and then have to edit it. They would be much more willing to pick up a phone and shoot a quick TikTok, which I think is really cool. And I think the more voices, the more creators equals more niches being covered, more people being recognized, more likelihood of finding someone who looks like you, who you want to engage with and follow. I kind of think it's quite powerful.
What do you think people are going to be saying about short form content like in 20, 30 years from now?
Who knows? I mean, I think it's like changed the landscape, the creator landscape, and also the consumption of the content online. I feel like maybe things like newspaper articles are one of the things that could die a little death because there's so much fluff. Do you know what I mean? When you read a newspaper article, a lot of it is extra information to keep you on the page for longer. But if you're making a TikTok, just sharing the news or summing up the key points, you're doing it in a much more concise way. So perhaps that will be like one of the casualties of short form content. I don't know. But I kind of think it can be very powerful.
Do you ever get this feeling of overwhelm from any of this, or that's just me?
Someone
you're not required to say yes to this.
No, but someone said to me at a house party one time when I was at university. They were like, "How are you doing? I feel like you're always like off doing something, and life is moving very quick for you." And I was like, "Yeah, that is how I feel." And they said to me that they'd been enjoying thinking about the process of active relaxation. So like taking time in your day to acknowledge and accept that you do like to scroll on social media. Your brain does enjoy that. So if that is something that you enjoy doing and you gravitate towards, then make time for it in your day. If you always punish yourself and feel guilt and shame when you're doing it, you don't even let yourself enjoy the time you're actually meant to be relaxing. So your brain is like, I want to do a relaxing thing. And while you're doing it, your brain then starts saying, this is bad. I'm a bad person. I should not be doing this. And that's so unhealthy to be constantly in a flux of, I want to relax. And then when you do start to relax, go, I'm a terrible person for relaxing.
Right.
So she was like, just practice actively relaxing, saying, I am going to sit and watch some YouTube videos, or I'm going to watch this Netflix show. And that's fine because my body and my brain need it. And now I have that mentality where I don't beat myself up if I spend an hour watching TikToks because I'm like, okay, I must have needed that.
Yeah, I mean, I like that. I like that it does, you shouldn't demonize habits necessarily. And I'm not really doing a good job of not doing that right now.
No, but that's what I mean. We all do it. Like we all tell ourselves, oh man, I wasted time doing that. And actually, if your brain was crying out to unwind, then it wasn't time wasted.
I think the tricky thing is just that it might depend. There are certain things, again, for me, short form wouldn't necessarily relax me. It would have to be a different example. It'd have to be some YouTube channel or some like documentary or whatever. I don't know. So I get your point. I just think that sometimes I'm kind of sucked into this thing that isn't really actually relaxing, and afterwards my brain's spinning. Like if I were to do that and then go straight to bed, I can't go to sleep.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so that's the part that's a little bit, for somebody like me, I guess, destabilizing,
Maybe it's a process of, following accounts that you find useful and then only watching your following feed rather than the For You page. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I guess it's about setting personal boundaries, but I agree it's probably not good for us right before bed and before sleep to be hit with all of this information.
Yeah.
Reading, great to do before bed.
Definitely. But there's a giant difference between the two. Don't you agree?
And that's why I think reading right now has found its place in my life more than ever before, because content and social media and that world is so fast paced. It's really nice to just slow down and just to have you and words on a page.
Yeah. A lot of people say, I don't know if this is, I sort of buy into this idea that short form and all this new stuff, it's shortening our attention spans.
Maybe.
I don't know if you agree with this or feel that way, but have you felt that has made it harder to sit down and spend hours reading a book?
It's a muscle that you can train 100%. Sitting down and reading a book is definitely something that you can get better at. And I feel like that sounds ridiculous and it sounds like something that you would never really consider, but the more I do it, the better I get. Not only at like the amount of time I sit and read, but also how much I'm actually getting from it and how analytical I'm being and how critically I'm thinking improves over time with practice. And that's, I guess, why I challenge myself to review things and think, if I didn't like it, I will still finish the book and ask myself, why didn't I like it? And is it because it was bad or because I picked up the wrong book? Like, this wasn't meant for me.
Right.
You know, if I'm not interested at all in sci-fi and then I read a sci-fi book, like, it's not a bad book because it was about space. I had a bad reading experience because I'm not personally interested in that, you know?
This is just so fascinating to me because, again, and I'll include the majority of social media.
Yeah.
It's such a different experience to something like reading because you're just sort of consuming this thing that's coming at you. And I find that the amount of processing power it's less, you know, whereas reading a book, you have to activate your imagination. You have to visualize in many ways the things that you're reading. And so I think it's kind of incredible that you've been able to make these two really work.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that it's always so important to ask yourself why about anything. So why am I enjoying this? Why don't I like this? And that, having been doing that with reading books, has also bled into everything else that I do. Because now if I see a piece of content online, for example, that I don't like, I would be thinking in my head, what is it about this that I'm finding resistance to? And thinking about it as a personal response rather than a problem with the content or with the thing is so much more healthy. We briefly mentioned kind of online hate and criticism. I really do think it's been great for me as a human consuming content to always be thinking about, why am I responding in this way, rather than like, how can I make sure they know?
Right.
You know, and if something isn't serving you, you can unfollow, you can mute, you can, you know, stop consuming it. I think. But for me, it's always like thinking about, why am I responding in this way?
So you think that's like the most powerful thing you've taken away from reading, like that ability to develop critical thinking? Like what would you say are the biggest things that you know, if you're having to explain this to somebody who stopped reading fiction, right? What are the things that you feel you gain from this, other than, I mean, lay it all out for me. So it's an enjoyable way to relax.
Yeah,
obviously.
I think that compartmentalization of art versus your response to it, and then you can substitute art for anything. So like human behavior, world events, and then your response. Like those are two separate things. And I think in making reviews of books, that's the kind of separation that I formed. It's like there is this piece of art, and then there's my response to it, which are two different things.
Are you ever stumped, by the way, on that point? Do you ever read something and you're like, I don't even know how I feel about this?
Yeah.
And what do you do about that?
Then I sit down and I think, why am I confused? Do you know what I mean? It's like, it's always that extra thing of like, why do I feel that way? Was the book deliberately confusing? Did I just not grasp it? Did, you know, anything like that?
Do you have methods for piecing this together? Like, do you go about decoding this through conversation, or like, do you write it out?
I think writing out, like a review, writing out thoughts is useful, and having kind of prompts.
I'm just going to keep drilling down on this because this is fascinating.
Keep going.
When you write a review, where do you begin? What does that process look like?
Okay, so specifically on books, but I guess you can apply this to a lot of art forms. Like, I think of things like tone, mood, perspective, characters and setting, but also intention. So like, what was I meant to get out of this? For example, there are books about awful things like cannibalism and incest. Like, they're disgusting, and the books are disgusting, but they're meant to be. Like, you could review one of those books and say, I hated this book. It was about cannibalism. That's horrid. That's deplorable and deranged and gross. Obviously it is. So the author knows that. So then I think you then need to break it down. Okay, is the author promoting that, or is the author? And the answer is probably no, I would assume.
Well, maybe they're trying to make a point, right?
Maybe they are.
Like, do you go online and try to get a better grasp of the context sometimes to figure that out? Yeah,
for sure. I think sometimes you need to read like the author's note, or listen to an interview where the author explains, and then you get a better grasp of things, for sure. The other thing I think you get from reading is empathy. And I think that's probably the most important one for me, is that you get to firstly understand perspectives and experiences that you've never had, but secondly, appreciate that everyone is having perspectives and experiences that you've never had. And if any of us wrote a book they would be about completely different things naturally, because we all perceive the world in a slightly different way. And, thinking about people and characters as like complicated, flawed things is quite useful to be like, no one is perfect and we're all just doing this for the first time. This is our first attempt at living. So we're just doing our best.
This reminds me of a conversation we had about like Haruki Murakami's his portrayal of women.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's
super
very
problematic.
Common. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, problematic, or do you feel, do you feel that there's any degree of intentionality to it where he's showing like a male perspective?
So this is what I've always thought.
Which can be two-dimensional.
Yeah, this is what I'd always thought when I read Murakami books, and they would speak about women in a way that would kind of objectify. We talk about them like they were just tits on legs, right?
Right, basically.
It's crazy. And I thought, okay, he's writing from the perspective of like this 19-year-old uni student who's been super sheltered. Maybe that is how that person sees them. And yeah, if you're writing from a character's perspective, we can't be like, that is wrong, because some people do think like that. And then as the reader, again, you have that separate, you're meant to be thinking, should we think like that? The answer is probably no.
Right.
Well, is no. However, with Murakami, I then saw this interview where a female Japanese author, Miyako Kawakami, interviewed him, and she kind of called him out on this, and she kind of said, like, is it intentional? Are you trying to get into the headspace of these characters? And he was like, no.
What?
And I was like,
oh, bummer.
Oh, really? And
But
it
then
kind of did change my perspective on him a little bit.
That's super interesting though too, because like, how old is he at this point?
Oh, I've got no idea.
He's an older guy, right?
Yeah.
So, at that point, for me, as I'm trying to gather context, I take into consideration where the author's
Who
from,
the author is.
And I think that also affects my takeaways from the book, because it's almost like now you're getting an insight on a different generation, right? Yeah. Not to be like, okay, this should be how it is, but
no, but it's interesting to hear perspectives that aren't the same as yours, right? And that is probably one of them. So there's value in that.
So you take into account all these factors. You sit down and you just kind of dump out your thoughts, or do you start from the beginning, or how do you do this? When you're creating a review.
Again, I guess it's like a muscle that you can train and you can get better at as time goes on. I always try and think of, in my videos, mostly I try and stick to not talking about any book for more than 2 minutes, because I think I can try and fit, unless it's a whole deep dive video on a specific book. But mostly, I think if I'm trying to be concise enough to do justice to the piece of art, to share with people who have read it, but also people who haven't, that's kind of my perfect like middle ground in terms of just like pacing and keeping the video entertaining and interesting.
So you kind of take your videos and you sort of break them down into
little 2-minute chunks,
like double servings of shorts.
Yeah.
Almost.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's definitely a format that works for you really well.
Yeah, but obviously the idea that I'm trying to inspire you to go away and read the book yourself. Right. So I guess that's why I kind of keep it punchy and to the point. But yeah, I'm thinking about all those things, like what was the tone of this and why, whose perspective are we getting and whose are we not getting?
Yeah.
And why is that? What effect does that have?
Totally.
And I love it. It's all the best bits about what I studied and my degree and everything without getting graded on it. So it's like taking the thing I actually loved and refinding the passion for it.
Right.
I think,
yeah.
Which has been really powerful for me.
And this happened organically for you, or it was like, you know what? I think I want to start consistently making these reviews and.
No, I mean, it's funny. I get like probably one of the only real negative comments I get is people just being like, there's no way you read those. And I'm like, why would I be reviewing them if I didn't read them? I think, if I could make a lot more content if I was making videos on books I haven't read. But it's just a genuine love. And that's what's the best thing about it. Maybe sometimes it's like hard to believe that someone could actually be that passionate about books, but I just really love it.
Yeah.
I do think that obviously the nature of YouTube right now is that when there's so many creators and it's such an oversaturated platform, Same with TikTok. You know, it's about doing video titles will always sound more extreme than, you know, that, and that's just marketing, I guess.
And do you feel like that is, you know, does that ever play into?
Well, maybe that's why it's less believable, quote unquote, but it's like you're going to see a video where I say, I'm going to read 5 books in 24 hours. I don't do that every day. I did that specifically to make a piece of content about it, you know? But you know, that's, if you're making online content, adding a time frame to anything makes it more interesting. It adds stakes. So it's like, if you, I don't know. Yeah. If I made a video called reading 5 books, it's like, okay.
Right.
If I do reading 5 books in 24 hours, suddenly you're interested. Can he do that? How does he do that? You know, that's just marketing, I guess. Same with, that's why I try and do more concept-based videos.
Yeah.
So I'll do like a week of reading books by Asian authors, or a week of reading dark academia books. These are all things I'm interested in, but I'll bring all the dark academia books that I'm interested in and read them all in 1 week and make a video trying out that aesthetic and to make a piece of content about it. So I think as an audience member, you just have to be aware that the creator is creating a project.
Yeah. Do you ever feel like you are finishing books that you wouldn't ordinarily finish because of this?
100%. And that's my favorite part, is that I get to, so when I
you get to talk about this. That's on the flip side. The great thing is that you admit, like, I didn't enjoy this.
Yeah. And you know, I get with my like celebrity book club, for example, I will read, my next video that I'm doing in that series is on Matty Healy from the 1975, because he's like, you know, kind of, they've been touring and he's been doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And I think he's such an interesting person. The books that he recommends are not books that I would probably go out to the bookstore and buy.
Nice. Okay, that's
But
good.
I love that. I love putting myself out of my comfort zone. I love like trying new things. And who knows, maybe one of those books will end up being one that I fall in love with and I find a new author that I really like, you know? So for me, having that curiosity is like a superpower.
Yeah.
Keeps it fresh.
Now, obviously, one of the unforeseen consequences of you rising in your status in the book to book talk world is that, like, people take your opinion seriously.
Yeah.
Has that ever been scary for you or created challenging situations? You know, like, there's a weight now to your words that wasn't there maybe in the beginning, right? And you've seen this. You've, like, books have sold out, you said, based off of your recommendation.
Crazy.
What's your thought process on this?
I always being fair. Talking about the piece of art, not the artist, I think is really crucial. Being respectful about like what has been created. And I'll always make sure I'm saying like, I didn't enjoy this, or I found it too long, or I found that the pacing wasn't fast enough, or I found that it lagged in the middle. Do you know what I mean? It's like, that's, again, it's my response. And I think it's important that you may have a totally different response.
Yeah.
And one of the things I always challenge myself to do is, even if I don't like something, I think, who would? So, you know, a 1-star review from me is so rare, because I don't believe that many pieces of art are like worth 1 out of 5 stars. That's savage, right? So I will always think, who would love this? So I might read a book that doesn't really resonate with me because maybe the themes are kind of, they feel immature to me. They don't feel fully fleshed out. Well, then I'm thinking, okay, maybe I would have loved this when I was 13 and I hadn't experienced these things yet. Maybe we don't need to get into the trauma of being alive every single time. Maybe we can, you know...
the backhanded compliments.
Yeah.
But so what's worth 1 out of 5 stars? Like a genuinely dangerous message, or how do you...
Yeah, I mean, I felt like a book like The 48 Laws of Power, which is just like You
didn't like that one?
I think it's so stupid. Like,
and so you're really harsh on the nonfiction books. That's what I've been noticing about you.
Well, I feel like nonfiction is a lot easier to
rip to shreds.
Well, no, it's more like, because it presents a perspective on the world which sometimes is kind of flawed. For example, the 48 Laws of Power really bases itself on like push everything you love away and like squash anyone in your path and keep your enemies closer than your friends. And I think, what world are we living in? Like, grow up. Like, just be nice to people. If you push away everything that is worth living for in order to get power, what are you left with? Nothing. And it's like a guide to eventually being unhappy. The value that book has, I think, is that if you're writing a villain in a book, you could read that book and be like, yes, any of these quotes could be a line that my villain would say.
So have you read much from the Stoics?
No.
No? That would be interesting, honestly, to get a review from you on
I would love
Stoicism.
to. Yeah.
Because obviously Stoicism's, it's become very popular in the last few years.
Yeah.
And there's many ways to interpret it, of course. But, what I find so fascinating about these schools of thought is the application element. It's a little bit closer to certain kind of Eastern ideas of detachment and whatnot. And what's really interesting about that is that sometimes there needs to be a counterbalance. Like, being too stoic means like, you're constantly fighting against these things that represent like vulnerabilities, right? I think the counterbalance to that is that we are flawed creatures with our vulnerabilities. And sometimes, indulgence is not necessarily this evil thing. And that's something that I found challenging about Stoicism. But I find that interesting I'm on this little tangent here because it's so fascinating to me, your reaction to the 48 Laws of Power. And I feel like this might be a broader feeling that you have about self-help.
I think that like self-help has its place, and there are amazing self-help books.
But it has its catch-22s.
Yeah, but specifically if we're talking about the 48 Laws of Power, like if your examples of how this works in the real world is like Chairman Mao, like that's not a good example. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like anyone with any critical thinking skills can zoom out and say objectively, like that is not a good person to be deciding as a role model. Right. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think there's a place for any school of thought, but you're right. Maybe I'm more harsh on nonfiction because it's easier to criticize a whole school of thought than a piece of art that someone has created.
Yeah.
That's probably why.
Now, does this ever get tricky when friends are involved? Because, you're very connected. A lot of people, a lot of writers, a lot of people writing books that are coming out. I'm sure a lot of people ask you to review their books.
I mean, again, it's about being respectful, right? It's about like just sharing. It's your response to anything.
So have you ever had criticisms that you've publicly aired of a book that a friend wrote?
No. So
how do you navigate that exactly?
Having friends who write good books. No, I'm kidding. I don't know. I don't know. It's never really been an issue. I think it's honest, but it's not mean. Do you know what I mean? I think it's always about being like kindness is always at the front of everything. And like, I think more if I were to give a review of a book that I didn't love, it would always be, again, it would be my experience with the book, but it would also be shrouded with humor and jokes, and it's lighthearted. I don't want to sit and be like horrible about something. I don't think that's healthy for anyone involved. It hasn't really been an issue. I'm not gonna lie.
Have you thought about this though? Like, have you ever felt like, oh damn, what if I have a friend
who wrote a book I didn't enjoy?
Who wrote a book that you were just like, I can't get past page 8.
Then I think it's common decency to just not talk about it.
So you,
Do you know what I mean?
You would cancel the review, basically. You'd be like, look, I can't get to this.
I guess so.
Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like it would be better in that instance to just say nothing at all. Because it's not like people are waiting like to hear what I have to say on this thing. It's just like, it can pass me by, and that's okay.
Yeah.
We don't always have to express every opinion that comes into our heads, and I think that's an important thing to consider. Like we were saying before about not always jumping onto social media straight away and sharing every thought I have in my brain. I definitely, even most days, I won't share what I got up to today until tomorrow. I just feel like that's a healthier way for me to exist on the internet, is to really consider each thing I put out before just sharing it.
Yeah, you have systems. It seems very clear to me that you have systems
Yeah.
because you're cognizant of the consequences of your actions.
I just think your immediate response is not always something that you will eventually believe in with the same amount of conviction. I think
Yeah.
it's so easy to, especially things like Twitter. I don't use Twitter anymore. I think that Twitter encourages people to respond to things that are happening in real time. And once you've shared your opinion, you kind of then have to defend it. And that's such an unnatural way of communicating.
Wow. Were there any specific events that led to you stopping using Twitter?
I saw, what did I see?
Is this a stance that you're taking against Elon?
No. This was decided long before Elon. But what I'm trying to think of an example I saw the other day. Someone had tweeted about their, like, oh, you can tell the cost of living crisis in the UK is going up because my gym membership just increased from £50 a month to £60 a month. Immediately, someone quote tweets it saying, who the hell is paying £50 a month for gym membership in the first place? Like, serves you right. And I just think, oh my gosh, let's just chill out. We don't always need to catch someone out and make someone else look silly, like make someone the butt of the joke. And I feel like Twitter and quote tweet culture kind of breeds that.
Now, how do you feel that this is different from the comment section on TikTok?
Yeah, I think like a quote tweet or a duet means that you're introduced to the commentary before the original piece of content, and that's quite dangerous.
Wow.
I think that you kind of sometimes you need to like consume the piece of content and then read the commentary afterwards, so you have time to formulate your opinion, your response, and understand that what you're consuming is someone else's response to it. I feel like the quote tweet is designed to make someone else look a fool, like someone else becomes the butt of the joke.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's necessary, obviously, to share another perspective, of course. I just think that the way that it operates right now is just it creates binaries where there aren't always binaries. It creates dichotomies where there don't need to be. When you go from like, this person has this opinion, I have the exact opposite. There's like a little middle ground, but the exact opposite is what's going to get the traction and the retweets and the likes and the views and the comments. So that side of things, I just stay clear of. I have my like duets and stitches on TikTok turned off, so people can't duet my stuff, because I'm like, don't make me look a fool without the context. I'll be a fool on my own terms. Thank you very much. So, and yeah, for me, Twitter was just like no longer a conducive space.
This was like a build-up over time, or it just kind of all of a sudden you're like, oh man, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, I just think I realized after a while that it was making me feel that I had to have a response to things so immediately, when actually sometimes you need to just go and reflect and ruminate on something and let it sit for a little bit before you type it. And also, character limits mean that you give a very punchy response, and so you resort to superlatives. Everything is pure evil. Nothing is like, oh, I don't really quite agree with that. It's like, this is deplorable.
And that's the fastest way to make yourself look like a fool too. Just to completely get swept up in the emotion.
But naturally, social media, we're talking about how much content there is all the time. Superlatives sell, so when you have a video that's called like the best books I read this year versus like some books I liked. Do you know what I mean? It's like the vocabulary is different. You see it in just like Instagram comment section where someone posts a selfie and the comments are like, you are the most beautiful specimen I ever laid my eyes on. Or people will be like, my body just learned to impregnate itself just from looking at it. Do you know what I mean? That's extreme. But words like queen, king, legend, like these are actually very strong words, but we're so used to using them in just like really common vernacular vocabulary. Like we just use them so regularly.
And we have devalued the word love too. Oh, I love this. It's become a synonym for like, and it's really not the same.
True.
I remember, I don't speak much German at all. I know words and phrases, but the word Liebe, it seems to be more powerful in German than the equivalent in English of love.
Okay. Why is that? Is that because there are other words between like and love? or
I'm not exactly sure, but I do remember Germans reacting differently to those words.
An example in French is like when I'm speaking English, I would often describe something as like perfect, So if I go to a restaurant and someone's like, hey, is this table good? I'm like, oh, it's perfect. And I found that when I was in France and I'd say like parfait, it's like not common to say that as a response to things. It's like that's a very strong response that I don't think you would hear a French person use.
Yeah.
Whereas like me translating my vocabulary into French, the sentiment of what I want to say is like, this is
great.
exactly what I want.
Yeah.
And in English, I would say like, oh, it's perfect. I feel like, oh, like this space you've created is perfect.
Yeah.
And I feel like maybe a French person wouldn't use such a strong word.
I think I agree with you. It's just, little reminders that you can't translate from one language to another, even if you have words that are similar, because the use isn't necessarily the same. Do people ask you to be, going back to Twitter, do people ask you to be on there? Like, do you get comments or messages from people being like, I need the hot takes? Or are you just doing enough of that elsewhere that there was no impact?
I really feel that if I feel like maybe we feel too self-important of like, my presence on this app is required. Like, it's not. You can literally do whatever just suits you best. I don't think so. I just use that platform really to just share publishing news and things that are happening in the space. Just basically, I will just now use my platform to amplify other voices more than my own.
Totally.
I think.
Okay, let me ask you a couple of concluding questions here.
Hit me.
Do you foresee a day where you will stop creating content around books? Like, do you see that coming to an end and maybe moving on, kind of like what you did with StudyTube?
I don't know. Kind of like I said before, I think maybe the next evolution of my content is to talk more about writing. Demystifying things has always been really important to me. So demystifying the university experience, demystifying the publishing industry is kind of the next thing that I see myself doing. I think that it's an industry that a lot of people have very little knowledge of, and yet it's huge. When people say like, why is every author a New York Times bestseller? Things like that. I'm so interested by those things. I want to really showcase or show what it's like to be writing something, scrapping it, writing something else, pitching it, being told that's not good, reworking it, editing it, trialing it, all of that kind of thing. I really want to share that process. So potentially in the future, through writing books, that's where I'll share my ideas and my thoughts and my feelings. Maybe it will manifest itself through fiction. Right now, it manifests itself on YouTube and TikTok and stuff. Maybe eventually I'll be sharing it in different avenues. But right now, I can't see an end point necessarily. I just think as long as I love making stuff, then I'll keep making it.
Totally.
But naturally, be creative people who like to share will do that. So I feel like we have that same natural instinct. I don't know why we have it, but somewhere deep down, that's what makes us similar. We have this desire to share and see how people react and respond, and then learn from that and communicate. And so
sharing things in some ways is this incredibly powerful way of almost multiplying an experience, because you like live the experience and then you make sense of the experience, and you can only know for sure. I mean, you actually said this before we were recording this, like from your StudyTube days. It's only when you can really properly explain something to someone that you have a deep understanding of it yourself, right? So it makes a lot of sense, and I wouldn't be surprised if everything that you do in the world of BookTube and Book Talk has helped you have a deeper understanding or appreciation of these books and what goes into them, right?
For sure. But the thing about having that instinct to share is so interesting, because it's such an anomaly in the binaries of introvert, extrovert, because often some people who share so much online are incredibly introverted in real life. In fact, a lot of people, I feel like YouTube kind of started because it was outcasts and introverts being their most authentic self on camera. And a lot of people who wouldn't have the confidence or the instinct to do that really resonating with those people.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the origins of YouTube. Thinking of people like Charlie is so cool, like Dan is not on fire, amazing Phil, people like that.
So you watched YouTube in the
They're
early
like the
days.
OG YouTubers, right? But the original YouTubers who were really successful kind of did suggest they did feel a bit kind of like outcasts. And I feel like it's so interesting. I do feel like the terms introvert, extrovert are not really that useful because I think that it fluctuates, it oscillates so much, and you can go between the two based on your social battery and many other things. But it is interesting, this instinct to share doesn't seem to be something that like all extroverts do or all introverts do. It's like really varied. And as a result, you have this incredibly diverse range of personalities on the internet too. But there must be something in there that links us all, this instinct to share, because other people don't have it. Like some people do not have any instinct to share at all.
You know, honestly, that's an interesting point because you're totally right. And I think I don't fully understand people that have no desire to make anything because it's such a massive piece of my life and how I make sense of things. You know, that's okay. That's not necessarily a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing at all, but I find it interesting. Some people don't have an Instagram account or don't share anything on Instagram. Just for me, I can't imagine that, which doesn't say anything about them or about me. It's like, we're just different. Yeah. And that's great. That's the spice of life. But at the same time, I just, hopefully someday someone does this big psychological investigation into why some people have the instinct to share and others don't. That's just something I'm curious about. I don't have an answer for you.
And then of course, I feel like sometimes also, this kind of tendency is reinforced because of the ways that you realize, like you kind of almost have to accidentally start doing it, right? True. I had no idea that we'd be here having this conversation 8-9 years ago when I was starting to do this. So, and I think that's the cool thing about, well, you know what? If that's what TikTok is doing by making it more accessible to people, then great. Yeah. I don't know if it's entirely the same thing. The problem being, sorry, here I go again, just ripping on TikTok.
Go.
But it's just that like the experience is a little bit different because I rarely go on the, I don't have TikTok, but like on a reel or a short or whatever, I don't go on the profile of the person, of the creator, right? You just kind of go on to the next one. So you're not developing that connection. And that's how I ended up meeting so many people. Yeah. Like, I don't know how you found me and sent a message, but it had to have been some YouTube video.
No, I met someone in a cafe who was like, who lives in Paris?
Right. That's
Nathaniel Drew.
You had no idea who I was? No. So somebody who recognized your work saw you here in Paris and told you about me, and you're like, oh, okay. And
then I was like, okay, wow, this guy's cool. Let's hang out.
So that's hilarious. So that flies completely in the face of my theory.
No, but most of my online, connections have been through being a genuine fan of someone's content, and then like, equally, I then could click on your profile and could see this whole like arsenal of content, this whole back catalog that you had. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And from those videos, I could tell that we would like vibe, and that I was just interested to like hear more about your worldview. You know what I mean? So yeah, I mean, I like that short form content can be more democratic, and that in the sense that there aren't as many barriers to creating as long form content. Yeah. Because you can just pick up, it's so normal now to film content on a phone, whereas maybe at one point it would have been frowned upon to like film a YouTube video on a phone.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what I mean? It has to be like high quality camera, high resolution. Yeah. I love that TikTok is a bit more, you're going to see a much more diverse range of people. And that's super powerful.
Definitely. And I think the thing that you said earlier is extremely insightful and linked to all of this, which is that no matter what it is you're doing, you've got to figure out your angle.
Yeah.
That's like the most important thing, because you can take a great thing and make it miserable if you don't figure out how it works for you.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So
you just got to be excited by what you're making.
Yeah.
I think everyone has the potential to be a storyteller. Storytelling has been the thing that I think I've always found the most fascinating. That comes into reading and writing. It also comes into my relationships with people. I always find that people who I gravitate towards are good storytellers. It's the one thing that I think is like non-negotiable for me in terms of forging relationships with people. If they're a good storyteller, then I'm like, okay, I'm in.
why do you think that is? Why do you think you gravitate towards people like that?
I just think it's fascinating. Like if I want to listen to you because you are telling me something interesting, even it can be that you just had a drama when you went to the supermarket, but if you tell it in an engaging and endearing way, I want to spend more time with you. I want to hear these stories that you have. I want to hear the way that you articulate them. So naturally, the people that I always gravitate towards are great storytellers, and that's the one thing that I find is really consistent in all the people I want to be around all the time. And I love that more stories get to be told when social media is made more accessible for more people. And sometimes short form content is the way of doing that, of bridging that gap.
I suppose so. I mean, it's kind of funny that the people that you most enjoy hanging out with are storytellers. It's almost like you surround yourself with the human equivalent of books.
My library of friends.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, it was a pleasure having this conversation with you.
Thanks for having me, man. And this very fancy microphone, which I might steal.
With this candle here burning on this very intimate.
Yeah, I think that like if you notice that this is gone and it's tomorrow, like it's in my suitcase and I'm taking it home because I'm getting attached to this microphone.
You liked it?
I think it's so cool.
It's so funny the effect that having a nice mic in front of you will have.
Yeah.
You're just like, I feel like everything that I'm about to say here is important.
Everything I'm saying is profound and it's going to change the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like I could tell you about what I had for breakfast, but it has this like extra gravity now that there's a microphone in front of me.
What do you think this is? Because you're far from the first person to have said this. Is it just like a human thing, like that we all want to be radio hosts?
Yeah, that's the fantasy. I don't know. Something about it. I feel that what I'm saying is being recorded, and that somehow makes it important. I've got no idea.
Yeah.
That I can't unpack. I just love it.
All right. Well, a mystery.
And we'll leave you on that.
Yeah. That was a conversation with Jack Edwards. I'll leave links to his work in the description or show notes. I'll also leave a few links to ways that you can support this podcast if you're enjoying it, including shopping for Cœur clothing. But there are also free ways that you can support my work, giving this podcast a good review or sharing it with a friend. I still really, really believe in the power of word of mouth in the 21st century. Anyway, that's enough for me. Thank you for listening.